happened?
To the ambulance, correct.
So you went to the ambulance with the defendant?
Yeah.
And was Mr. Becker with you?
Yes.
What happens when you get to the ambulance?
I mean, so it was snowing, and it was more to kind of just get everybody into a nice, warmer location where it wasn't snowing or windy or anything like that. And we were discussing that, we have a Section 12 that states we have, regardless of if you want to go, we have to take you to the hospital. She was arguing that she really didn't need to go to the hospital, and we were trying to convince her to go to the hospital because once the Section 12 is written, it doesn't matter what the patient says, we have to get them there one way or the other, whether it's cooperatively restrained or chemically restrained with sedatives or anything.
It's not a voluntary order?
It is not a voluntary order.
Inevitably, did the defendant agree to go with you to the hospital?
Yes.
When you were going to return to the hospital, was the defendant placed in the back of the ambulance where a patient would be?
Correct. So how we operate for anybody that's a Section 12 or anybody that is under the influence of anything, we always operate with 2 people in the back of the ambulance. So myself and my partner, Jason Becker, were back there. And then we had to take somebody from the engine company and have them drive to the hospital, and that was Sam Park.
Sam Bach?
Park, P-O-C-H.
Thank you. Before you left, before you started to drive away from Fairview, were you having any conversations with the defendant?
Yes.
Can you share with the jury what those conversations were about?
So we were talking. She was upset. She kept asking if there was any chance her husband could be alive, and even sitting outside in the snow with no coat on for many hours.
Did she indicate what many hours meant? How many?
No.
How often did she raise the issue of whether or not or how long he could be out for?
I'd say at least 3 to 4, maybe more.
Part of your job is to care for patients?
Correct, yes.
Was part of your job to try to get them to the location safely?
Yes.
And sometimes you treat patients with physical injuries, don't you?
Oftentimes it is physical injuries, yes.
Are you trained when you're trying to transport somebody on how to interact with them?
Yes. Well, sometimes if they're upset, in this instance she kept asking if there was any chance that he could be alive, and that we really didn't know what was the patient that ambulance 1 took. We really didn't know what his condition was, and but figuring that it was a hypothermia type case, being the conditions outside, we were trying to give her hope that there is a saying in the medical field, you're not dead until you're warm and dead. And I was basically, there's stories of children falling through ice and falling into rivers and being underwater for multiple hours and coming out, being resuscitated and having no neurological deficits. So I was telling her those stories just kind of to say, look, let's be sure we'll get to the hospital, we'll find out more there, just trying to give her any sort of hope that her husband would be alive.
Can you describe her demeanor when she was in the back of the ambulance with you during your interactions with her?
She would go from pretty upset, crying. One instance where she kept saying, I can't take care of these kids, I can't take care of these kids, they're not my kids, and they're not his kids. And at that point I understood who ambulance 1 had taken, because John was pretty well known in the town for taking on the care of his niece and nephew. So I said, listen, it's okay. It looks like you have a very strong support system. And then Miss Reed said, do you know Carrie Roberts? And she had been crying. And she picked her head up and said, "Do you know Carrie Roberts?" And I said, "A matter of fact, I do." And she said, "Anybody who knows Carrie Roberts wouldn't say that about her." And I said, "Well, she did come to out at early in the morning to look for your husband in a blizzard." And she just rolled her eyes and put her head back down. And I thought it was just bizarre.
Objection. Move to strike.
I'll strike that last sentence.
Would you describe her demeanor as even through that ride?
No.
How long did it take to get to the hospital?
I mean, you can refer to my partner's ambulance trip report. I'm sure it has the
Do you have it right with you, sir?
I do not know.
Well, let me ask you.
I would guess about 15 to 20 minutes, somewhere in there.
You don't have an exact memory?
No.
When you get to the hospital with a patient under these circumstances, do you leave them at the door?
No.
What do you do?
We have to hand off care. So we go in and we have to give a report to a nurse to let them know what their condition is, why they're coming to the hospital, and what we found taking them to the hospital.
When you got to the hospital with Miss Reed, did you interact with the hospital personnel?
Yes.
Do you typically, after you hand off a patient to staff, do you leave?
Typically, yes. This time, Miss Reed was, I'm going to say, not really cooperative with the nurse there. The nurse was asking her to get into a Johnny, give a urine sample. She was not cooperative. The nurse tried to work with her, had an ER tech go and ask the doctor if she had to get into a Johnny. She came back. She said, yes, she's a patient. She has to do all the normal stuff. We really didn't feel comfortable actually leaving the general area. I don't know if it was just shift change or what, but security wasn't there. And with her demeanor, we just didn't feel comfortable leaving the nurse by herself with Miss Reed.
You said that there was some difficult times. Was there some difficulty about the defendant accepting wearing a Johnny?
Yes, she was refusing to get into the Johnny, and the nurse kept saying, well, you got to get into this Johnny. The nurse did try to work with her and you know, asked the doc if...
Objection.
I'll allow that.
And so the ER doc, the ER tech had to come back and say, yes, she has to get into the Johnny. And at that point, she did. She you know, seemed to have calmed down and was getting into the Johnny. Security personnel had shown up, and we felt comfortable being able to kind of leave the nurse and the tech on their own.
Before security came, was there difficulty in her providing a urine sample?
Objection.
Do you know the answer to that?
Can you ask the question again? I'm sorry.
Why don't you ask it a little differently?
Sure. Do you remember whether she was giving the nurses a hard time about a urine sample?
Yes.
Objection.
So break that down, Mr. Brennan. The objection is sustained.
You said that she was giving nurses a hard time.
She didn't want to give a urine sample. And then the nurses kept asking her to, you know, this is the cup, you pee in the cup.
Objection. Not funded.
No, I'm going to allow it.
You were there and saw this, right?
I saw it, yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, you knew before you got into Ambulance 2 that you were heading to Fairview Road for what is called a Section 12, correct?
We were dispatched for a Section 12, correct?
Right. And that was not your first call for a Section 12, right?
No.
You had been in that job since 2006?
Yes.
You've handled a number of them over the years, correct?
Correct.
The fact that the call came in as a Section 12 gave you some idea of the nature of the issue that you might be dealing with, correct?
We had an idea that it was for a psychological issue, correct?
Right. It told you that somebody at that location was suspected of being in some type of either psychiatric or emotional distress, correct?
Yes.
And on your crew, or of your crew, I should say, you were the one to drive the ambulance 2 to the residence, correct?
I drove to the address at Fairview.
Now, you've said that when you got to Fairview Road, you don't recall the time, but you do recall that there were still emergency vehicles on scene, correct?
I do.
There was nobody lying in the front lawn of 34 Fairview at that time, correct?
Correct.
And do you know how much later, after 6 a.m., you would have gone there?
You'd have to refer to my partner's report.
You don't know if it was minutes or hours later?
It was minutes. It was within the hour. I don't know.
Within the hour,
Yeah.
okay. And you said that there were, or you testified that there were 2 police vehicles on scene, correct?
At least 2.
At least 2. There could have been more than 2.
It certainly could have been.
And those police vehicles in such a situation, particularly with the snow falling down, would have had their blue lights flashing?
I'm not exactly sure if they did or they didn't. Sometimes the police shut off their lights when they arrive on scene. Sometimes they don't.
Okay, so you don't have a memory one way or the other.
No, nothing sticks out.
But those police vehicles certainly were not hidden. They were in plain view, correct?
I would say so.
Minimum of 2, maybe more. Correct?
Yes.
And there was also a gray SUV parked near that residence?
Correct.
And there was a fire engine there as well, correct?
Correct.
You called it our engine, right? That was from your
Well, it would be engine 3,
engine 3 from
or at
your
least
station.
the station 1 engine.
I'm sorry?
The station 1 engine.
I
So
see.
so Canton Fire has 2 fire stations. We were coming from the second station. The station 1 engine is the one that responded to Fairview.
Okay, and that was a typical large fire engine, correct?
Yeah.
And did the fire engine have its lights on?
I assume it did, only because we rarely shut our lights off on a scene.
Sure. And there were police officers walking about, milling about?
Yes.
Do you know how many?
I know I spoke with Officer Sarif and Officer Mullaney,
Okay. And
so
were
at
there-
least 2.
And you know them by name?
Yeah, Canton's a fairly small town, so you run into the police on a regular basis.
Sure. And you work cooperatively with them, correct?
Yes.
Were there other police officers besides Sarif and Mullaney?
I'm sure there could have been, but I don't recall ever speaking with them or interacting with them.
Okay. Were there other EMTs or firefighters there when you got there?
Just my Lieutenant Woodbury, and then firefighter Sam Pock.
Okay. And they were in charge of Engine 1?
Well, the Station 1 engine.
The Station 1 engine? Okay. And there were also civilians on scene, correct?
Correct.
So you would agree that there was a lot of activity outside 34 Fairview, correct?
There was a fair amount of activity.
I mean, there were people and vehicles and lights surrounding that residence, correct?
I assume so, yes.